Um, so I just want to give a shout out to my colleagues in the Office for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion in the Department of Medicine, Drs. Christina Harris and Teresa Seaman, for their support and helping me always put these together. And our biases, or sort of conflicts of interest, are we believe in a society grounded in equity and justice. So those will be my biases. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our present situation and why we got to the place that we need to actually have an intense focus on equity mindedness in approaching issues around career development, education, et cetera. So there's been a broad lack of awareness or disbelief about systemic inequities, and particularly in the social determinants of health, education, employment, healthcare, criminal justice, and other areas. And so what we find with this mindset is attributing education and training outcome disparities to student and trainee deficits, right? So it's sort of blaming the victim, and if we don't get out of that mindset, it becomes yet another burden on our trainees. So when we think about what we're doing for career development, we need to step back and reflect on ourselves and rethink our approach to training. So again, how did we get here? So we have a historic and persisting structural inequities, and this inequitable distribution of these social determinants of health is due to a combination of factors: structural racism, which we talk about mostly, but it's also sexism, materialism, sectarianism, and others. And which, if we think about it globally, which of those elements predominates depends on the country you're in. In the United States, structural racism is the predominant factor, and that's because it was used to justify and support slavery and still used to support post-slavery oppression. And an important characteristic of structural racism and the ideology behind it is that it can persist in governmental and institutional policies in the absence of individuals who are explicitly racially prejudiced. So in other words, doing nothing allows it to continue. So there has to be an active set of processes or steps taken in order to have an impact on dismantling structural racism. So I won't go through any of the details per se, but we've had slavery in the United States for the first 265 years. And then we had legal segregation and discrimination for about 100 years. And now we have continued discriminatory policies and practices, much of which is still supported by state law or case law. And by case law, I mean, when the judges are in court and they say, well, let's go back and see what the Supreme Court said about this case previously, they go back to 1925 and look at a case, and we kind of know what the answer to what the Supreme Court thought in 1925. And so a lot of people in America say, well, didn't the Civil Rights Bill fix all of those problems? And the first question we might ask is, do you mean the 1865 Civil Rights Bill or the 1964 Civil Rights Bill? So clearly the 1865 Civil Rights Bill didn't fix a lot. And the 1964 Civil Rights Bill fixed more, but there's still ways to go. And the question is, do we need a 2063 Civil Rights Bill, right? So post-civil rights, so before civil rights, we had massive discrimination, and there was substantial housing discrimination, led to substantial segregation, the use of redlining, which and housing covenants that were laws reinforcing housing segregation, and the inability for African Americans and other minorities to benefit from massive investments in low-cost housing that led to creating the middle class. So a year ago, a probe done by Newsday with 86 potential minority buyers, they were sent out to look at houses out in Long Island, And 40% of the time, they were discriminated against. 19% of Asian testers, 39% Hispanic, and 49% of Black testers experienced disparate treatment. So although the law went away, legally you cannot discriminate from housing, the practice still exists. So we can say there's progress because it used to be close to 100% discrimination. Now it's down to 40%. So I don't know when that evens out. But what we see though is the systems that are put in place continue to work as originally designed. And so this is some of the challenges that we have, whereas a lot of people think everything's equal for everybody. This article came out yesterday in Inside Higher Ed. What happens before college matters. And it says in non-white school districts that nationally they receive $23 billion less per year than white school districts with the same number of students. So for every student enrolled, the average non-white school district receives a little over $2,000 less, a little more than $2,000 less than a white school district. Well, what about poor white school districts? Don't they receive less? Yes, they do receive less. They receive about $150 less per student than non-poor white school districts. So there is a slight disparity there. Clearly $150 less per student adds up, but nowhere close to $2,200 less per student. So we see educational structural inequities in educational systems continuing despite the passage of civil rights and Brown versus Board of Education. So these structural inequities continue on. So just sort of grossly, how might we achieve equity? Well, one is to sort of understand how and why this is happening. So if we think about equality and we want a world where everybody's treated equally, that would be great. And we see people here, they have a ladder, they have an opportunity to go, get a diploma, get the American dream, reach your goal. But that's not how the world is. The world isn't equal. So we have some people, they have plenty of boxes they can get on, they have all the support underneath them, and so their climb up the ladder is not that high. Other people have a little higher to go, but they have some support. But then there are groups of people who, through structural racism and the ideology, white supremacy ideology behind it, that created chattel slavery and has created laws and policies that put people of color, women, LGBT groups, disabled and others into essentially a hole to start out with, right? So they're not even starting at a level playing ground, they're starting from a hole. But more than that, their ladder is not normal. So they're not only in a hole, their ladder is broken. So in addition to the structural inequities, they have to deal with microaggressions and biases and other aspects of discrimination. And so people are trying to get out of trying to climb that ladder to get there, but the ladder is breaking and they're starting from this hole. Well, what happens if we say we want to increase diversity? So now we put a lot more people on the line to climb up that ladder that's in the hole that's broken, right? So that's the goal, to increase diversity. So we have a lot of people, more people line up there, and some more people will make it. But that's not really solving the problem, right? So to solve the problem and to create equity, we need the accountability and the support behind it, which we call justice. Right? And so justice is filling that hole, fixing the ladder, and then giving people a couple of boxes at least. It'll never be equal. No one, there'll always be different people having different boxes, but there should be some level of parity. The important thing to recognize is you will hear narratives on many stations and editorials and blogs, et cetera, that say when you give the people, groups of people who are in the hole, who now have a fixed ladder, if you give them some boxes, that's reverse discrimination. Okay, because they said they got boxes, but I didn't get boxes. right? Because I want to be treated equally. So I'm in figure 4, I have my boxes, you don't have any boxes, but if you get 2 boxes, I should get 2 boxes. Nobody was interested in treating people equally when they dug a hole and they broke the ladder. But now they want things to be treated equally. So you have to be very careful about the narratives that use equity sometimes and equality other times in trying to push these, I would say, false narratives about reverse discrimination. So what's the way forward? First, don't be afraid of the name structural racism. No one on this Zoom owned an enslaved Black person or created structural racism. But everyone on this Zoom has the opportunity to either continue to support structural racism by actively supporting it, or by doing nothing, because if you do nothing, it'll continue on, or you have the opportunity to dismantle it. Those are your choices in regards to structural racism. So that now brings us to sort of the classroom and to career development. And so the goal for the classroom and career development activities is what we call inclusive science. And so for inclusive science, what are we trying to do? So we have areas of faculty development, cultural and research enrichment and curriculum innovation, partnerships and networks. We heard Arlene talk about many of the partnerships and networks that made the SEAL project come alive, and then training activities. And so we want participation of diverse researchers, diversity innovations in science. We want diversity for climate, culturally responsive practices, and integrated racial, gender, and science identities, all coming together with connections with diverse communities to create this sort of home for inclusive science. And if we have this sort of home, I think we're in a place where we can really help people achieve their full potential. So how do we get to that point, given everything that's happened and where we are? So when we think about equity-mindedness, one thing that's important is we have to recognize the ways in which these systemic inequities that we reviewed earlier disadvantage minoritized people in a range of social institutions and contexts. And we have to be mindful to not attribute outcome disparities exclusively to students or perceived deficits in students' identities and lives. So we want to think first about reframing educational training outcome disparities, and particularly poor outcomes, as an indication of institutional underperformance rather than student underperformance. If we're supposed to be that good as an institution, we should be able to think about how we teach and connect with our trainees to help them be successful. Okay, and so we have to critically reflect upon our roles and responsibilities and how we make sure that we fully actualize those roles and responsibilities in the context of the students and the trainees that we're working with. So what does that look like? In the classroom, in the RICMAR community, we want to promote interpersonal interaction. You want to get to know people, because the main strategy for bias, racism, and oppression is dehumanization. So we want to eliminate dehumanization by promoting interpersonal interaction and really getting to know people, right? So we have these retreats where we get to know people. And these are some of the things, and we have our monthly meetings, and we have presentations and interactions and things where we get to know people, right? And then we want to recognize people as they are, right? So it's not that I don't see color and I don't know who you are or anything. No, we want people to recognize the different attributes that each person brings and each of us has, right? Our unique individuality is important, and we want to make sure that we acknowledge that from everybody. And that allows us to have our teaching, our mentoring, our training to meet the students where they are and help them reach their full potential, rather than see a potential problem or something that we have to manage, because now I just can't give the same blurb and the same approach to everybody, because everybody's not the same. So I want everybody to read through these lists of 10 items and jot down your number. I'm not going to ask you to put it in a poll or anything, just jot it down for yourself. So this is the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire for adults. Right, so we know a lot about the ACEs for children and pediatrics. It's really big. This is the questionnaire for adults. And just write down your number, just so you know what your number is, right? Did you feel you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you? Did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reason? Did you live with anyone who is depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? Did you live with anyone who had a substance abuse problem? Did your parents or adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten or harm each other? Did you live with anyone who went to jail or prison? Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? Did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? Did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special? And did you experience unwanted sexual contact? So just get your number, because it's, I think it's just interesting, helpful for each of us to know what our number is. When we look at on a national level, we see that approximately 61% of adults report having had at least one ACE and have experienced at least one ACE, and 16% have 4 or more. Okay, 16%, 4 or more. Women and minorities, underrepresented minorities, are at greater risk for having 4 or more ACEs. Okay. People who experience 4 or more ACEs compared to those with none have a 2 to 5-fold increase in pretty much every health condition that's bad, including substance abuse, depression, suicide. And so for a lot of our trainees and a lot of our communities, we're always asking what's wrong with them. And the real question is what happened to them? And also, what did we being society, and we're part of society, what did we do to them, right? So we need to be thinking about that. And that, I think, gives us maybe a different perspective when we're working with our career mentoring plans. So what are other strategies to support our underrepresented minority students and trainees? We need to be a little more intrusive. Many of us struggle with asking for help. I know for me, I never want to ask for help till the last minute. So it's a struggle for me and a hard practice for me to make sure I'm asking for help, right? And I have to think, who are the people I want to ask for help for? So if it happens to me, I'm sure it's happening to many other people. As mentors, as teachers, we want to reach out. Don't say, approach me, ask me. That my door is always open doesn't work. Because the door's open doesn't mean people are going to come in. You need to reach out and set up a time and invite them in to meet with you. Okay. And that starts to foster the relationships which are necessary for the follow-up. And then if there are additional issues that need to be addressed, either additional mentors on the team or additional support services, we want to connect them with people who we know will care about their success. Right? And we want to connect them with people, not an office, with a person. Right? That way we sort of have a line of accountability going through to our mentees. And we want to make sure that we're looking at how people are doing, and people who are doing really well, we'll prioritize them last. People who are struggling a little more, we want to prioritize them first and really reach out to them first and get them connected with the resources they need. And then we can go back to the other trainees that we have. There's been a lot of calling people out and cancel culture. And more recently, there's been what's called calling in, right? So rather than calling people out, calling in. So listening for when moments or times when bias, oppression, or other microaggressions are happening, and not to call people out, but to sort of take a pause, get the group together, find out what happened, talk about it, describe why that might be insensitive or demote inclusivity for certain groups, and what experiences or backgrounds or beliefs where people may come up with, how people may come up with these biases or beliefs, right? That why someone would say that. So we want to make these teaching moments and more constructive rather than just to try to call somebody out and bash them and make them feel bad. For the trainees, it's important to listen with and learn from each other, right? And so we try to put together, and clearly COVID is not the greatest time for this, and we need to think about how we do it a little more, but space where you're together. And I think it's really important to listen with rather than listen to, right? So I want people to listen with each other. Listen to other and recognize differing views, but still stand strong in your own perspective. Strive for intellectual humility, reach for curiosity, understand the difference between opinion, informed knowledge, which is what most of we deal with, and truth, which we talk about a lot and is really ethereal and part of another conversation. So I think we should stay at opinion, informed knowledge, and truth we should probably just set aside for now, because truth is, I would say it's ethereal, moving and flowing. Climate, for us as faculty, we want to make sure that the classroom, that our workshops or retreats are a place where trainees want to come, and if need be, particularly during a time like during this pandemic, that that we are sort of aware of mental health resources that might be available if people need them. And now we have providers trained to address the types of challenges people would have now, right? So racial, gender, sexual orientation traumas, intergenerational traumas. And again, maybe resources for other safe spaces for our mentees. And then maybe directing them to legal rights they may need, particularly in a time like now with the pandemic, with racial and social injustice activities going on, to think about the impact of increased policing. So we heard Aziza say earlier, what are the sort of sensitivities people have when they see a police car come up behind them. Some people, police car drives up behind their car, they feel this is great, I am safe, this is the best I can be. Other people, when a police car drives up behind them like me, I'm like, oh my God, this could be a disaster. I hope they go somewhere soon, right? Housing evictions can be very important for many of our trainees. Food insecurity. So we want to think about these things. We probably want to reach out and ask, because people don't want to volunteer that they're having challenges like this. So I want to summarize the following. So when there's I'm just so here, a partial collection of influences on thoughts that shape our societal biases, but more important, challenge equity-mindedness, because these are the thoughts that many of our trainees have, faculty have, and we're trying to balance, right? So there's trust or distrust of the majority society. Inclusion or marginalization from society. Institutionalized racism or pride. Maintaining or losing culture and cultural conflicts. oppressive or agreeable marketing images and strategies occurring. Residential segregation can be good or can be bad depending on your setting and the situation and who you are. Discrimination versus non-discrimination. And self-worth being reinforced or not being reinforced by educational systems, media, and daily messaging. So all of these things are going on in the minds of us as mentors, but they're going on in our mentees, and different mentees, depending on their backgrounds, have different amounts of one or the other parts of a lot of these, right? So what does that mean? Well, if we think about stresses and cognitive processing, there's a framework that looks at the global workspace for cognitive processing. And so we have stresses, all of us have stresses in life. And the more stressed out we are, it's harder it is to concentrate, the harder it is to get things done. And if you have poverty, if you have discrimination, if you have a lot of other things going on, then your ability to process the tasks that one needs to do becomes more and more challenged, right? And so this happens to everybody per se, but those with more stresses are gonna have more challenges doing their cognitive processing and implementing what they have to do. So what does that mean? If we have a student or trainee who has both the usual work-life stress of being a Rick Marr scholar, and then you add the additive stress, either at work or in life in general, of discrimination, feeling isolated, trying to figure out how to navigate in a society. If you're gay or bisexual, you're wondering, is it appropriate for me to say this, not say that? I'm not sure if I should make myself visible because I don't know if this is a comfortable environment. And so there's lots of stresses that people have going on, in addition to microaggressions they may be feeling. And so what we see is there may be self-segregation to avoid being in groups that they feel are not like them. They can have fear, anxiety, apprehension, impaired interpersonal relationships, reduced spiritual connectedness with their peers and with their mentors, a reduction in their ability to remember, a reduction in their ability to implement actions, and their performance goes down, right? So which balls are students likely to drop if our department or institution is not a safe space? And so when we see someone's performance going down, what we shouldn't say is, you really need to pick it up, otherwise you're not going to make tenure. What we should say is, you know, I notice your performance isn't doing like it was. What's going on? What's wrong? Is something wrong? What's going on? So if we can get rid of some of those extra challenges that they're dealing with, and we can reduce some of these additional burdens, then there's more cognitive, the global workspace allows for more cognitive processing to occur. And hopefully the students can get back to more optimal performance. So I think, you know, what we want to be doing as mentors and as leaders of centers such as Rick Marr and departments and divisions is trying to think about how we create these environments and how we think about the challenges that many trainees may have that we may not be aware of or thinking of because of biases from sexism to racism to sexual preference, discrimination, et cetera, in our workplaces. So I'll end with this one quote. Maybe we should be thinking about and trying to create equity mindedness in our spaces is for people, before you speak, think. Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Will it hurt anyone? And most importantly, will it improve on the silence? So thank you very much for your time, and I hopefully we'll go to the breakout room and have some little discussions where people can bring up some of these points and you know, add more depth to some of what we just discussed.